So we are about to cover debugging and validating code. We have some demo files that are things that you may work with in your exercise, or some similar examples that clearly have some errors. And so usually when you debug a file, whether it's when you're working on, or maybe if you're working in a team, hopefully the first thing you see in this file is that there's a bunch of red. So you could start off by starting to correct errors that you see right off the bat. A lot of the times when you're working on your own files, though, you may not necessarily see them as quickly. So in this case, this is a file that we've provided you, so you're probably going to notice some of these errors right off the bat. So you are welcome to start correcting ones that you see right off the bat. If you do not see them, or perhaps if you've corrected as many as you can, the next step that we're going to do is basically validate our code. So we're going to open up Chrome, and we are going to go just search for HTML validator. And it should be through W3C, which is the organization that sets the standards for the web. So they basically have come up with all of the different coding strategies that we've got to be taking in terms of the HTML and CSS language. So there's a few different methods here. One is you can copy in a URL. So if you had a URL, you can post it there. If you wanted to upload a file, you can choose to upload your file right here. Just quickly upload. I actually prefer the direct input method because we can copy and paste pretty quickly. So we just go in and copy this code, and this is specifically for our HTML. Okay, if you are validating your CSS, there is another validator for that, which we'll show you in a separate screencast. So with that said, we're basically going through this validation process, and if you've never done it before, it is daunting at first because they basically spit out a bunch of warnings and errors. So a warning is more of like a suggestion that you should correct. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact the display of your page, but it could. So in this case, line 1 is warning you of something that is basically saying add a language attribute, which basically controls the language for your page. So that would be a good thing to go back in and add. You'll notice that there's links here, so you're able to basically go and click on this link, and it basically talks about a lot of these different concepts. So it is a little bit more daunting for some topics than others. But there are a few different links here that we're going to be able to click on and find out more about whatever it's warning us about. Okay, in this case here, though, we actually want to correct all of the errors. So if we take a look, we're starting out and we've got a lot of errors. So that's 23 errors. It does also populate the code right here and point out what some of the errors are. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that sometimes, even though you might have a lot of errors show up, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how many errors really are in your page. Sometimes one error can create several different errors that may not be true errors. So what I usually encourage students to do is to go through and to look at your code and line by line go through. So right now we're going to start off right here where it says at line 6, column 20, we're going to take a look real quick at this, and it says attributes running together, URL string, and an unquoted attribute value. So if we take a look here, line 6, I don't know if you guys can see that, but we're missing a quote mark. Okay, so now if I took this again and copied it right back in, I can just basically check it and see if we have that one gone. So notice that it's gone. And now we can just keep on running down the document. So we get to the next one and it says line 8. Let me take a look. And this is where you do have to know a little bit about HTML. At this point in this class, you guys should be familiar with basic tags. So in this case, line 8 is just basically warning us that our head tag should be before, our closing head tag should be before that body tag. Okay. And then again, we can just basically go through and just see if that corrected that situation. And then we'll just scroll down And then look, it's gone. So now we're going to just basically go through the whole document. I would encourage you guys to take a look at each line and correct the ones that you for sure know that are errors. And then after that, when you get stuck, that's where sometimes it takes a little bit more extra work. I know some of these ones down in this section here where a lot of stuff is red, that's a little bit more tricky. So this is where you're going to have to go in and perhaps look at things like the spacing between an attribute and a value. So there should be one space between the values and attributes. And then each value has to actually have quote marks. So if we take a look at this, like right here, we basically have a bunch of odd things going on, and it could be because something else is not closed or opened. Okay, and it could also be because we have other tags up here that are going on that are causing problems. So you do want to make sure you correct certain things. Like usually we don't nest a list inside of a paragraph. And usually we do go through line by line and actually with precision correct things. So it will take you some extra time. I will allow you guys to correct this file on your own. I'm not going to make it error free right now through this whole tutorial, but the goal would be basically that you're going to go through this process and correct as many of these errors. So we'll just test and see how many we've got now. We are now down to 15. So I would just basically go through a process of elimination, and eventually you will get down to 0. So the goal is to validate all of your HTML, and then again we're going to do the same process in a CSS page, which goes through a different validator, but it's very similar. So I did want to also point out one other thing. So you do want to test your page inside of a browser, because sometimes things are errors that maybe a validator can't catch. Okay, so in this case there's a CSS page here. We're just going to open that real quickly. And we've got some errors there as well. Again, both of these files intentionally have errors that you have to debug. But one of these errors in this HTML file actually has more to do with our link to our file probably. So if we take a look, let's take a look real quick. So that CSS should be rendering. So right now the file name is actually module8.css, and in the code it's linking with a dash. So we're going to basically go in and correct that, and then when we test it again, we're going to take a look, and then it starts to show your CSS. So just keep in mind you do always want to test your HTML pages in the browser regularly, and then this validation really, it could become a great proofreader or error checker for you. It's not always perfect, but it should be a good tool for you to be able to help you spot errors in your code.